It's time to change the rear tire on my Triumph Trophy. In this video, I'll show you how to remove the rear wheel and change the rear brake pads. Removing the rear wheel and the rear brake caliper is pretty simple. And here are the tools you'll need. A ratchet wrench with an extension, 15mm socket, 14mm socket, 8mm socket, 8mm hex bit, 5mm hex bit, and a screwdriver, a C-clamp, some brake cleaner, and of course a new set of double H-centered brake pads. The first thing you do is put the bike up on the center stand. Then you remove the side cases. Now you have to remove the muffler before you can remove the rear wheel. Let's look at how that's done. To remove the muffler, you loosen the strap where the muffler connects to the exhaust pipe. You use the 8mm socket to do that. Then you use the 8mm hex bit to loosen and remove the bolt. Here. And then just pull the can off. And there's a bolt, a washer, 2 spacers, and a nut. Be sure you mark them, set them down so you know how they'll go back. Okay, now I have the bike in gear and I can proceed to remove the lug bolts. I've removed the lug bolts. Now we have to go around to the other side and remove the brake caliper. To remove the brake caliper, you use the 14mm socket to remove 2 bolts. Once the bolts are out, you can remove the caliper. Once the caliper is off, then the wheel comes off very simply. Now this tire has some 14,000 miles on it and it still has some tread left, but we're planning a long trip, so I'm going to change it now rather than try to change it somewhere in the middle of our trip. Okay, I put the caliper back in place and just put the screw through it and hold it in place turn the thread a couple of times. Need to remove the retaining pins for the brake pads. And for that I'm going to use a 5mm hex bit. And one of the brake pads fell out on its own as the screws backed out. So we had one brake pad there. Removed the screws the rest of the way. This is under spring pressure. It's a little tough. It looks pretty good. I'm going to spray it with some brake cleaner, spray the pistons. I'll let that dry, and we'll look at these pads. I'll get a picture up close, but you can see they're pretty well worn, almost down to the end of the wear marks. These are the pads I bought. They're EBC double H centered pads. Now I use a C-clamp to retract the pistons because we're going to need more space to get the caliper back on. And the pad without the ears on it goes in first on that side. And the pad with the ear on it goes in on the other side, and that ear hooks around the locating pin. And then the retaining pins go in. There's no evidence of thread locker on those threads, so I'm not going to. Now you might not like this, but I use a screwdriver to get the pads separated. And put it back in place. Then tighten the bolts, and you're all set with new rear brake pads. The tire is back from the shop. I had a local independent mount it for me. It's important to have a shop that knows what they're doing when it comes to pressure monitors. These tires have pressure monitors in them, and apparently it's fairly easy to break them. One shop I took a tire to broke the pressure monitor, and it cost them $160 to have Triumph replace it. The rear brake caliper is off, and I'm going to put the tire back on and tighten the lugs. And there you have it, the rear tire's back on. The next thing to do is to put the muffler back on. A couple of things to think about when you put the muffler back on. There's a collar here on the pipe, and it goes in to the exhaust pipe and should land at the end of the exhaust pipe. Also, on this mounting bracket is slotted, so you can slide the pipe and adjust it. I mount the muffler and slide it forward, and then tighten the bolt here, then tighten the radiator clamp. Now remember, we have spacers and washers, and we kept track of the order in which they go. Put the spacers in. And the bolt and the washer. So I slid the muffler in, put the bolt and the spacers on. Now I'm going to tighten it. The bike is back together now. I had a little difficulty with the putting the muffler back on. The hose clamp for the muffler started to come apart, so I went and bought a new one, put that on. Also, when I was off camera, I took the calipers off the front brakes, and the pads, the upper pads or trailing pads, were worn. There are 8 pads in those 2 calipers. I replaced the 4 upper pads, and notice one of the pads on the left side was worn a lot more than the other. Not quite sure why that is, but I'm hoping that I'm all set as far as the brakes are concerned, front and back. So I hope you liked this video. Please leave a comment below. Let me know topics that you would like me to cover, and I'll work on putting together some videos on those topics. Thank you. I put the bike in gear to hold the rear wheel steady, and then using the 15mm socket, you just, well, I thought I put it in first.